this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. We are here today for a consulting episode, and I am really excited to share this guest with you all. We are going to be speaking about making that transition from solo to group practice and hopefully providing some insight to all of you out there that might be in the same position from someone who has done that and someone who will be doing that. So I would like to welcome Anna Berin to the show.
Julia, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I would love if you would introduce yourself to the audience and tell us more about you.
Sure. So I have spent the last 15 years a nonprofit. In 2015, I decided to do my nonprofit and open up and join a private practice, which was really lovely. And as I grew in my leadership role in the nonprofit and then expanded my family and had 2 babies, I realized that it was a lot. So, with being blessed in my family life, we decided that I was going to, resign from my nonprofit world and just focus on my private practice because I could.
Mm-hmm.
I have done that since September of 2021.
Oh,
22,
wow.
since last year.
Okay.
Since last year.
Wonderful. So it sounds like you had some great experience under your belt to prepare you for this. But how has the transition been?
I've been blessed. I cannot complain.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is such wonderful opportunity for learning from your clients and also learning about the business world. And I think that that's naturally where I go. And I have, immersed myself in the work. And I think that it's been beautiful and wonderful. And there's such a huge need. So, which is why I've been ready to expand. And now I'm actually going to be taking the next steps to expanding.
Okay. So before we get there, what is your specialty and who are your ideal clients?
It's a great question. I think that has sort of shifted through my developmental trajectory around my professional career. So pre-kids, I'm going to preface it by saying pre-kids and post-kids. So pre-kids, I was trained as a trauma practitioner. So I worked with, inner city kids. I oversaw DCF group homes for a very long time. I ran CBAT programs. I'm also consulting for a nonprofit for a almost like an ICBAT level of care, which is acute psychiatric mental health. So that is where I specialized. And then once I had my babies, I found that my own chemistry sort of shifted in terms of tolerance. And I felt like the best place I could be the best version of a practitioner is shifting to adults. So since about 2015 and most recently since 2022, I've really found a niche in working with the LGBTQIA plus community. So I do a lot of work with, adolescent kiddos. I do a lot of work with transitioning youth, also young adults and adults, across the developmental lifespan. I work with individuals who have anxiety, depression, phased life challenges. I don't particularly subscribe to any theoretical framework. I consider myself to be an integrationist, but that's because I really look at what my clients need and I create whatever the plan is that best suits them.
Wonderful. Integrationist. I love that. So in this vision that you have for this group practice that you will be forming, do you anticipate finding other clinicians that share that same specialty? Would it be a multi-specialty practice?
So I think what I would really appreciate is having a multi sort of disciplinary platform.
Yeah.
For me, it's really important to be able to offer a variety of different disciplines. So culture and identity is really important for me, as is managing life stressors. So I would be open to, adding specialties. It doesn't necessarily have to be a niche in the LGBTQIA world. I think that I have an affinity for it, and I think that the community absolutely needs it. So I would absolutely welcome anyone who wants to really, challenge themselves and work with that community, but it wouldn't be exclusively that.
Okay, wonderful. So why now? It seems like you have had this on your mind for a
Yeah,
while
sure.
and you are preparing yourself
Yeah.
to make this move. So tell me about what is going on now that's pushing you.
Yeah, well, I mean, why not, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have the capacity and I've had the capacity. And I think at this moment in time, I feel like because I am working 40 to 50 hours
Yeah.
with, two little ones, I have a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to scale down.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to train the next generation of clinicians to be mindful and present and really understand where the field of mental health counseling is,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's shifted significantly since the pandemic.
Can you speak a little bit more to that? So it sounds like you would be very open to maybe some newer graduates. Would you be open to interns?
So absolutely, I actually
Okay.
already have I have one intern already slotted for
Mm-hmm.
October. I have another one that is interviewing with me for the end of August.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so part of it is I want to be able to provide a platform where, new grads or, students are able to really have a level of comparison between, whether it's nonprofit or community-based versus private practice.
Mm-hmm.
My inclination is to encourage them to look at all of their options rather than come straight to private practice, because I think sometimes they can be really enticing, but then
Mm.
they miss a significant portion of what the professional development looks like.
Sure.
I can absolutely provide that since I have,
Mm-hmm.
wealth of experience across.
Sure. Well, so with that wealth of experience, and we had talked about your confidence in the business side before we started recording, what is on your mind that you might have a question about at this stage and as you're approaching this venture?
Yeah, so I think for me, recruitment probably is the biggest, I'm going to call it a challenge.
Mm.
Challenge because I find it to be quite anxiety provoking.
Mm-hmm. What
So
about it is anxiety provoking? Like finding the right person to fit what you're looking for?
part of it is in terms of like how do I market myself to find like-minded individuals.
Yeah.
I am happy to help train, but I
Mm-hmm.
also want someone, or folks who have been in this field long enough to be able to, work autonomously, but
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily want to do the back end work that I've
Mm-hmm.
already done. So I am happy to provide them with that level of reprieve, and I'm willing to take on that level of responsibility. So.
Sure. Okay. So before we get into the specifics of recruiting with these interns, how did you go about acquiring them?
That's great. Great question. So Facebook's been great.
It sure has. That's how we connected.
Well, I don't typically use social media in that way, but I
Mm-hmm.
am in multiple mental health groups. And so, I just put it out there that like, hey, Barron's like Incorporated is expanding and this is what we're looking
Wow.
at.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm happy to offer people opportunities to either grow their practice or grow their
Mm-hmm.
skills, because I will be providing them with direct supervision, unless they're licensed, in which case I'll still provide collegiality and
Sure.
may not necessarily be the supervision for licensure, but it certainly will be a place where we can work collaboratively together.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yes, I have found the same. So, just in terms of, I almost compare it to like if you go on a dating website, it's not for everyone, but you're going to have access to
Right.
so many more people, and then you still have to vet them
Yeah.
and obviously do your own process to determine whether or not you feel comfortable moving forward. But it can be a great way to connect with so many more people. So, I'm glad that that was successful for you. And those individuals may potentially turn into hires depending on their stage in their education. And
Yeah.
sometimes those can be some of the best hires
Yeah.
because they have been
Absolutely.
trained by you and you are obviously
Absolutely.
making those connections between coursework and their clinical experience. But if that isn't the case, so the starting point. So you and I had talked a little bit about values and you
Mhm.
were speaking about how important it would be to ensure that you find people that are aligned with those.
Yes.
What would you say are your core values that you've developed through your own clinical
Mhm.
work and your practice?
So one of the things that I have learned in working for a nonprofit, and I don't think it's nonprofit specifically, I think it's working for just large corporations in
Mm-hmm.
general, is that there is a work-life balance challenge. So what I want to do in my private practice, and what I will be doing, is really
Mm-hmm.
offering people an opportunity for that work-life balance.
Yes.
I think that the work is incredibly, incredibly meaningful, but
Mm-hmm.
it also takes a toll on our mental health as well as our physical health.
Sure.
So one of my values, well, I mean, among many others,
Mm-hmm.
really developing clinicians to have very good boundaries as well as a sense of agency and autonomy. So I want to grow clinicians into their own, so that when they leave, and the expectation is that they will leave at some point, so
Mm.
that they can really develop their own sense of agency and identity in the world that we live in. So
Sure.
that's one piece.
Okay.
And the other piece is that we have a culturally competent, evidence-based, as well as interpersonally rooted practice,
Mm-hmm.
where relationship is really fundamental to creating a successful therapeutic alliance, as well
Mm-hmm.
as helping them to meet their goals. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's in the relationship, it's in the quality of the relationship, right?
Yes.
However skilled the clinician can be, if they can't connect, and if they can't align, and if they cannot understand, they're not going to be able to help the client make progress. So for me, the interpersonal piece is really significant in that I can teach a lot. I mean, I can teach a lot. I can't
Sure.
necessarily teach empathy, and I
Mm-hmm.
particularly teach this interpersonal effectiveness, where you have to, I mean, for me, authenticity is really important. So I show up
Yes.
in my most authentic way. And sometimes that does not sit well with people, but that's okay. They can
Helps to weed out the people that maybe are not the best fit.
Right. And they can opt out, or I actively talk to them about, like, hey, so this is my process. And it may not be for everyone, and I recognize that, and I appreciate that. So
Mm-hmm.
I expect that, the clinicians that I hire and the clinicians that work with me are able to also develop their own voice, because I think it's very easy
Mm.
to sort of get subsumed by what people want them to do versus them
Sure.
developing their own critical thinking skills about who they are as practitioners.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you are already setting yourself up for success once you get those prospective clinicians in the door and you're sitting down and you're interviewing them, being really clear about what you value, what their experience is going to be like in your practice in comparison to someone else's, and then all of the things that you do offer. So obviously these are things we want to make sure we're including in the job description, but it's where do you post that so that you're going to get those people that are aligned. So we had touched briefly, and you were saying how Indeed was probably not something you were going to
I mean,
pursue.
I'm
Can you?
I'm open to it if that sort of helps, but
Sure.
I don't know that I'm not really sure if that would pull for the type of candidate.
Mm. Can you speak on that a little more?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose Indeed is really the quickest way to be able to sort of access openings, job openings.
Sure.
So I think in terms of visibility, that may be a
Mm-hmm.
way to put myself out there, but I don't know who sort of looks at Indeed. I'm imagining
Mm-hmm.
it's a whole host of people, so maybe I'm making
Sure.
myself short by saying not Indeed. Um,
Mm.
I particularly don't necessarily have, an exclusion criteria. I just
Sure.
haven't really, I haven't really explored it enough to be able to,
Okay.
know or.
Fair enough. Well, what I will say is that we are geographically in
Mhm.
the same area. And so, in posting on multiple different job recruiting
Mhm,
sites,
mhm.
I would say Indeed is the one that I have had the best luck with.
Oh,
Now, you
cool.
will have people that are looking for jobs as a therapist and literally just expressing interest down the line, one after another.
Yeah.
And so, my question when I'm screening someone is always, what is it about Compassionate Counseling Company that has appealed to you? What
Mhm,
has made you interested in this
mhm,
practice? I want to make sure
mhm,
they've checked out the website. I
mhm,
want to see that they've pulled something out from what I wrote and took the time to put
mhm,
in the posting.
mhm,
But I would say that what I like about it is obviously having the option for you to actually put in certain criteria and pull resumes, but then for people to be reaching out to you and you can have certain specifications. So,
mhm,
what licensures you're looking for, or all the parameters around the things that you offer
mhm.
and checkpoints. And so, I do think that you'd have to do a little bit of screening,
Of course.
but I do think that it's great and you can have a free ad up there and
Oh, you
kind of
can.
have that running while you're doing other
Oh,
things.
I didn't realize that you could have a free ad.
Yes, absolutely. So if you don't update it regularly, it will kind of fall to the bottom
Mhm,
and won't
mhm,
be as prominent. But yes, you can have that going. And I do think that's a great thing to have. The
okay.
other thing that I've had a lot of luck with is LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah.
So I find
Yeah.
that obviously that's where the majority of professionals will go
Mhm.
to have a profile. And you also can set filters. And so what I found really
Okay.
helpful is not only sharing my job post with all of my colleagues, former
Mhm,
coworkers, even former professors, local schools, because some of the best employees have come from recommendations from
yes.
people that I respect and that I obviously
Mhm,
have a good professional relationship with. But I also have found that through LinkedIn, you can put in certain filters for, let's say you're looking for someone that might be graduating. A lot of people will put on there that they're students. Or if maybe someone that is working in community mental health and is really burnt out from a lot of those requirements,
Yeah.
you might want to reach out and actually send a personal message versus just putting your post up, which you should do in addition. But to just say, I just wanted to share this posting with you. If you happen to know anybody that's interested, I'd really appreciate if you would pass it along. They may not be looking, or someone that you have on, something that you have on there might appeal to them. You never know. And I feel like putting in some of that effort, I mean, it's even just relationship building. Those people, even if they haven't ultimately sent someone my way, have become part of my network, and they follow what I do in the practice and my consulting. And it's really been a nice network building effort. So that's something else that's been helpful. And then there is always your website and SEO. And so having that tab on your main site, saying that you're hiring, and really doing what you can to have it show up in searches, and that's a whole nother realm. Simplified SEO Consulting, I'm going to plug them. They're wonderful. So they have kind of multiple packages where they can either teach you how to manage the SEO yourself, or they can do it all for you. And so they're very reputable. They are owned by a social worker who has her own practice. So that's a huge bonus, and they really know what they're doing. So that's one suggestion I would make too. So what are your thoughts on some of that? Does that all sound like...
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And like I said, colleagues, I mean, that is one where, and then once you start building your team, you can obviously offer incentives to them. So once people are up and running, they are past their 90-day introductory period, you feel like they're a good fit, and they're checking all the boxes, offering a referral bonus to your team for identifying someone. Those have been some of our best hires. So one of the biggest recommendations, it seems like you've had some experience in this. This is probably not new news, but I have learned that I was overly idealistic in my hiring. If someone seemed excited, if they were qualified, if, we seemed to connect and there was a good vibe in the interview, come on down. And I have learned to really space out the hiring process and have it multi-step. So not only is there that screening call, but then there's the actual interview. And then I always make sure that there's a second interview. And now that I have a team, I have one of my clinical team leads sit in. We've done panel discussions where they might log into one of our virtual meetings, and the clinicians in the practice will each come prepared with a question. And then we'll have the prospective clinician introduce themselves. And that's a really nice way to get the team involved.
Lovely.
But then in addition, obviously, you're checking references and a background check and all of those things, because I've been really surprised with things that I didn't pick up on, because people are obviously putting their best foot forward and kind of showing one version of themselves. But then I would even say once you hire them, that whole 90-day period, I've gotten so much more stringent around tracking session numbers to make sure that they're meeting the expectation, and the quality of their notes, and making sure that they're checking all of those boxes. And so then also having it really clear in my manual and in what they sign that if they're not meeting that criteria, then this is what it will look like. So tell me a little bit more about your thought process around that in terms of like protocol and procedure and that sort of thing.
I need to write all that.
So I am happy to send you some resources.
Wonderful.
I did purchase a template for an employee manual, and I'm sure there are going to be things that come to you from where you previously worked.
Handbooks. I've done plenty of the handbooks.
Yeah.
And I've written job descriptions, so that piece doesn't overwhelm me.
Yeah.
But all of that I'll have to create.
Yes. And the nice thing is I would just keep it as a Word document, and as things come up, it's fluid and you're adding to it. What I had found is that I knew what needed to be contained in it, but I was surprised at how many things I can very easily do myself. And probably explain if somebody was sitting with me, but to actually put it in writing is a whole nother thing. Like making sure that it's clear and it's step by step, and that everyone is going to be able to follow it depending on their learning style and how they absorb information. So so that's been interesting.
Well, I can also hire a consultant to do that piece. I'll just tell her what I need.
There you go. Yep, that's
I'm
a beautiful
okay with
thing.
outsourcing. I think there's some people who are a little bit apprehensive. I'm not. There's somebody else that has a skill set that I may not, or I may not have the time, but they do. I am happy to use it as a write-off and
Love it.
allow them to support me in the practice.
Sure. So at this stage, when you're thinking of this team and your vision for your team, share a little bit more with the audience about what that vision looks like. So when you say work-life balance, how do you see that translating for somebody that comes on board?
So how I see it is that I am willing to be flexible. Folks are, I think for part-time clinicians, there'll be a cap of a certain number.
Sure.
I haven't grown big enough to do a full-time, but I mean, if we grow, that is certainly something that I'm willing to do. We can talk about vacation time, we can talk about sick time, and I think that that'll have to happen when I grow. But until then, I think the recognition that my focus is really on their mental health and on their own well-being, and that if they cannot be present in the way that they need to be available to their clients, then they shouldn't be doing this work in the capacity that they are. So really providing direct supervision around like, hey, what are you doing for self-care? How are you managing your work-life balance? Can you manage this in addition to having, I want to call myself an expert at multitasking.
Yes.
Doing an enormous amount of things all at once, which for the record, we cannot do, even though we think we are doing it wonderfully.
Right.
I think it sort of depletes our resources. So being, realistic and really helping them to form their own expectations of where they need to be and thoroughly reviewing what those are is something that I am willing and able to provide. And I also want to encourage the growth from like a multidisciplinary as well as a multicultural standpoint. Culture for me is important, and I'm not thinking about like race and ethnicity. I'm also thinking about like family and diversity.
Yeah.
So incorporating the values of family is really important. I think post kids, my perspective has significantly shifted. Now, that doesn't mean that clinicians who come on board have to have children by any means, but I want them to have the perspective that if they're working in my practice, that the expectation is that they're going to be developing good enough boundaries so that they can use those transferable skills, not only with themselves and with their clients, but in their own life.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that these are all things that you're being so cognizant of beforehand, because you're really setting people up for success. I mean, I don't know that there's really any profession that excels in self-care, but I can say that our profession, it is not a strong suit. And I think sometimes we need that permission. And if we have someone that's overseeing us, that's already saying at the outset, I support this, and this is what I want for you, and we're going to check in around it, and I'm also practicing it. How incredible is that? I wish that was the case across the board.
Right. And with that said, I expect a level of competency that I don't waver from. Right. Client care is important. Being honest and transparent and present for your clients is my expectation. For folks to be aware of their own worldviews and assumptions and how they present in sessions is absolutely important. So while I appreciate and value the mental health component and the working around boundaries, I mean, I certainly have a level of expertise that I will sort of enforce in the work. So while there is my hope is that there is a very good balance, that when they are doing the work, it feels very professional, very collegial, and really supporting our clients at a really high level. All of my work is really insight-oriented work. I, for better or for worse, don't really know how to be superficial. So that doesn't always work well. My husband reminds me that I need to small talk, but I'm also not him. So he's incredibly...
Yeah, we need people like that. I mean, people I'm sure know where they stand with you, which can be really refreshing.
I mean, I can also say that sometimes I'm like, Anna, you're a little intimidating, but I can be if you don't know me. But if you do know me, there's nothing intimidating about me. Maybe 10 years ago, I was intimidated. My professional identity shifted quite a bit, and I recognized that I did not need to, enforce my role. I think by virtue of being in my role, that was sufficient. I think that came through, like professional development and knowing that power doesn't equate to competence, and that, power also does not equate to respect. Since shifted my but the paradigm around like respect and interpersonal integrity and really being present for people. And I think the shift happened for me when my daughter was born 4 years ago. I went back to the residential world, and somebody that I respect very dearly said something to the effect of like, you're the senior director. We really need you to step up. And mind you, I was already working 50 to 60 hours And my response was, I've been doing this for over 5 to 7
Mm-hmm.
years. You've been in this particular role, maybe a month or two, and
Wow.
I'm exhausted from performing at 150%. And I want to be there for my children. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
response was more so like, well, your children are not neglected. They're taken care of. And my response was, as much as I love my work, I do
Mm-hmm.
not want it to be at the expense of my family. And I think
Yes.
that's where my shift happened,
Ooh.
where I recognize that whatever organization you work for, they're always going to need you to perform more than what
Yes.
you are willing, not even willing, beyond your capacity. And it wasn't until I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing four people's job.
Mm-hmm.
Either you pay me for four people's job, or I'm not doing it. And I didn't.
Right.
And it was it was hard because
Mm-hmm.
it really went against, in many ways, sort of like my it's not integrity. It was just more around like my expectations of performance are really,
Mm-hmm.
really high. And to set that boundary did not mean that I wasn't willing to perform. It just meant that I wasn't willing to exploit myself anymore.
Right. Well, it sounds like the expectations they were setting were not the most realistic, especially with the shift that you had recently had. And there wasn't that acknowledgement of that. But it was a really positive shift ultimately because I don't see you forgetting that anytime soon. And so you're
And
bringing
I
that at
won't
the
forget it.
forefront. You're
And I
leading
think,
with that.
right. And I think that you develop a level of empathy that, having kids sort of changes you. At least it
Yeah.
changed me.
Yes, I
So,
can relate for sure.
yeah.
So I can see so basically, just to summarize what you were just saying,
Hmm.
it sounds like for you, quality is of the utmost importance. But if you're really clear on the expectations that you have and you have someone that's willing to learn, seek out supervision, continue training, and is really providing quality therapy, you are willing to not only do your part as their boss, but even beyond that to really make sure you're checking in about how they're doing as a person and
Mhm.
not just as an employee.
Yeah, I actually do. I don't know that that's what I always do, irrespective of
Mm.
where they are. I think the piece that people don't necessarily expect is for me to acknowledge that, hey, this isn't working.
Yeah.
So let's figure out whether or not you're gonna adapt or adjust, or if
Hmm.
not, let's figure out a different place for you. And I think sometimes people are surprised by that. But again, my expanding my practice really isn't for profit. It is
Hmm.
simply to help grow a community of clinicians to feel self-sufficient and empowered enough to feel like they have some work-life balance. I am transparent and, clearly not doing this for money.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it is appreciated, and I'm grateful that we have someone that operates from a place of integrity in this catchment area. We need more of that. And it sounds like you're willing to be as hands-on as they need, but that ultimately you want to encourage that autonomy and them to be able to operate in a way that works for them. So a couple of things that I'm thinking are within my practice that I found helpful for what it's worth. And it sounds like you're going to be having these touch points and meetings with staff
mhm.
and checking in around where they're at. Engagement surveys were huge. I
Oh,
found like even
okay.
though I was having those regular meetings and checking in about them holistically, the things that they put in writing really surprised
Mm-hmm.
me and were
Cool.
very different and much more elaborate than what they were saying in those
Okay.
meetings one to one. And then having an opportunity for them to share that with someone neutral. So we ended up bringing on a
Okay.
human resource
Okay.
consultant that they had the option to meet with if they wanted to go into more detail or they had suggestions about ways the practice can improve.
Okay.
So I feel like that was huge.
Okay.
So that was just a recent thing that we had done that I feel
That's
like a
great.
lot of valuable feedback came out of, and it really speaks to exactly what you're saying. There were questions on there about their stress level in a typical week and what is the main source of stress.
Right.
How is their work-life balance and how would they rate it? What can I do as a practice owner to help them on their professional
Yep.
journey? What are their long-term goals? And then another piece that was really helpful is bringing in outside trainers. So we did a
Okay.
self-care workshop and
Mm-hmm.
talked about how not only is that something that I support, but they all did their own assessment of where they fall
Oh,
and kind of that pie
beautiful.
chart and all the dimensions of wellness and really having like a collective
Mm-hmm.
discussion afterwards of
Mm-hmm.
what we can do in the practice. So I know you had mentioned Reiki and potential integration of more of a holistic approach. Can you speak on that?
So I want to table that for a little for
Okay.
later. I feel like that is, my it- it's a complicated space
Yeah.
because having a doctorate in clinical psychology, and then having a master's in clinical mental health counseling, I think that there is absolute space for spirituality, but Reiki sort of comes from a different discipline. So I am still working out how it is that I'm going to integrate this, not if, but when.
Sure.
And I think spirituality isn't just about religion, right? It's about your connection to the larger scope.
Yeah.
So I don't particularly have an answer for that yet. I will pretty soon.
But I love that there is going to be an integration at some point, and I think that is a wonderful additional component that you offer. So is there anything else that you want to touch upon before we share with people how they can find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got a lot of questions just in the context of, billing and intern billing and what that looks like, but that might be a different episode.
Yeah, and you have my contact information, so do not hesitate. We probably deal with a lot of the same insurance companies, and we're dealing with the billing piece, so I'm happy to help however I can. Yeah. But yes, please share with people how they can find your practice if they're looking to work with you or your future clinicians, or if they're interested in applying.
Wonderful. So you can Google my name and it shows up. So I'm on 3 different platforms. I'm on ZenCare, I'm on Headway, and I'm on Alma.
Okay, great.
So those are the 3. They can also send me an email at berinpsych@gmail.com, or you can text me on my cell phone, 774-314-1215. Texting is probably the easiest and the quickest way to reach me. If you call me, I will not pick up.
Right.
Correct. I will respond by text.
Yes.
Just because I'm in sessions most of the day, and if I'm not in with my kids.
Totally understandable. Well, I will make sure to include that in the show notes to make that very easy for people to just point and click. I am so excited about this venture for you. It sounds like it's been a long time coming, and this incredible balance that you bring to this endeavor, that you'll be promoting that for other people. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.